There are names you hear and forget. Then there are names you hear once and feel them attached to your chest like a weight. The Hawthorns belong to the second kind. Their story is not one you stumble on in school books or county archives. It is a story whispered, guarded, because even to speak it is to risk bringing its rhythm closer. Yet you are here, and now it is too late to turn away. So before I begin, breathe with me, stay with me, and if you value not being erased, like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Leave your presence stamped in defiance against a curse that erases names as quickly as it swallows breath. The Hawthorne bloodline begins in Massachusetts in the late 17th century, just as the fires of which trials were dying out, but suspicion had not. The patriarch, Elias Hawthorne, was a minister, remembered not for kindness, but for his obsession with purity. He did not simply condemn women accused of witchcraft. He pursued them, hunted them, cataloged their sins with the fervor of a man who believed the devil spoke through every breath of the unclean. In 1692, when Salem drowned in its own hysteria, Elias was not just a bystander. He was one of the loudest voices urging the gallows forward. But curses are not born in courts. They are born in silence, in the hatred that festers after the screams stop. And according to records buried in family Bibles, Elias Hawthorne pronounced sentence on a woman whose name has been struck from nearly every surviving page. Her initials alone remain. Them witnesses said she did not cry, did not plead. She only whispered a prayer as the rope tightened. That prayer was never written down, but every Hawthorne descendant since has carried its weight, because from that moment forward, madness threaded itself through their blood. Elias himself lasted only a year before visions gripped him. He spoke of shadows at the edge of lamplight, of hearing his own sermons whispered back to him by voices he could not see. His final days were marked by convulsions, eyes rolling white, body twisting as if strangled by invisible hands. His congregation said it was illness. His family said nothing, but his journals remain, their ink shaking with confession. I hear her still. Her breath is mine. And so the bloodline began its descent, not with wealth or legacy, but with silence, whispers, and the heavy inheritance of a curse. What makes the Hawthorne curse different from the many family legends littering New England is its persistence. It did not fade with distance, did not dilute with generations. It sharpened. Elias's eldest son, Nathaniel, was found wandering the woods at midnight, his mouth full of dirt, muttering that he was burying his tongue before it betrayed him. His daughter, Mary, sewed her lips shut with thread in front of horrified neighbors, whispering that if she spoke, the prayer would finish itself. By the third generation, the family no longer lived together under one roof. They scattered across counties, each attempting to escape the shadow of the name. Yet the curse followed. Always the signs returned, visions, muttered confessions, strange deaths that looked less like accidents and more like rituals no one admitted performing. By the 1800s, descendants tried to erase themselves from history altogether. Some altered their names, marrying into other families, discarding the Hawthorne title like a rotting cloak. But every time, the blood revealed itself again. Husbands driven to madness. Children speaking words in sleep they had never learned. Daughters standing in rivers until frost swallowed them whole, as if waiting for invisible hands to pull them under. It was during this period that a darker detail surfaced. A physician in Boston, Dr. Calhoun, treated one Hawthorne woman who had been institutionalized for what was then called hysteria. In his notes, which survived only because his grandson donated them to Harvard's archives, he wrote, "The patient does not speak, yet her lungs expand as if answering a voice I do not hear. She inhales with another rhythm. Her eyes are not vacant. They are following something that moves in silence. Again, the curse returned to breath, to rhythm, to silence. The same silence Elias claimed haunted him. The same breath the nameless woman must have whispered as rope tightened. Each generation seemed to hear it more clearly, until madness was not the exception in the family, but the expectation. Neighbors came to believe the Hawthorns were marked, not by illness, but by covenant. That their patriarch's devotion to purity had chained his blood to the very thing he sought to destroy. And if that was true, then every Hawthorne child was born not innocent, but already listening to whispers no one else could hear. What is more chilling is this: not all of them resisted. Some embraced it, and it is their names we must uncover next. There are always those who run from a curse, and those who kneel before it. In the Hawthorne line, the third and fourth generations birthed both kinds. For every child who tried to hide their name in new marriages or distant states, there was another who heard the whispers and listened more closely. They began to believe the curse was not punishment, but inheritance, an unholy gift. The most infamous among them was Jonathan Hawthorne, born in 1821. His life is barely recorded in official documents, but journals discovered in a sealed attic in Hartford paint him as both scholar and fanatic. He studied medicine at Yale, though he never practiced. Instead, he devoted his notebooks to recording the moments when the silence around him thickened. He measured his own breathing, his pulse, his dreams, and he noticed patterns others ignored. Jonathan became convinced that the voices his family heard were not hallucinations at all, but messages buried in the spaces between sounds. He wrote, "The world is too loud. The divine speaks in the gaps. The curse is not damnation, it is invitation." Neighbors remembered him wandering the cemetery at night, standing over freshly dug graves with his eyes closed, inhaling as if trying to draw the silence of the dead into his lungs. By the time he was 30, Jonathan had gathered several cousins who felt the same pull. They called themselves the Silent Brethren. To outsiders, they were simply a group of eccentric relatives. To those within, they were heirs of a covenant. Their gatherings were held in abandoned barns and cellars, always at night, always in places where sound seemed to die unnaturally quickly. They spoke little, preferring instead to sit in long silences until someone claimed to hear the rhythm, an intake of air that was not theirs, an exhale that brushed their skin without breath. The rituals grew stranger. They began to bind their mouths with cloth during these meetings, swearing not to speak for hours at a time. One diary entry from Jonathan reads, "We are vessels. The less we speak, the more clearly it speaks through us. Words are chains. Silence is the key." Of course, townspeople began to whisper. Livestock went missing. Neighbors reported hearing low hums at night, rising and falling like chanting, though no words could be made out. The sheriff investigated once, but Jonathan's influence at Yale shielded him. Besides, nothing illegal had been found. Only family gathered in silence. But the silence itself became an infection. In the years that followed, every member of the Silent Brethren met an unnatural end. 2 were found drowned in shallow wells. Another hanged himself, though his family swore his lips were sewn shut before he died. Jonathan himself vanished entirely in 1857. His journals end mid-sentence, ink trailing off into nothing. No grave has ever been found. For the Hawthorns who resisted, this was proof of the curse's destruction. For those who embraced it, it was proof of ascension. Jonathan had not died. They believed he had joined the source, that he had become part of the rhythm itself. And from that moment forward, the bloodline split, one half trying desperately to bury their name, the other chasing silence deeper than breath, deeper than life. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Hawthorne name had almost disappeared from public record. Families had moved westward, taken on new identities, married into new bloodlines. But no matter the distance, the silence remained. One striking case appeared in Chicago in 1908. A young woman named Clara White, newly married, was committed to an asylum after months of violent fits. Her maiden name had been carefully omitted from her records, but a nurse later discovered it. Hawthorne. Clara was only 22, yet her decline followed the same pattern as her ancestors. She whispered to empty corners. She stitched her pillowcase closed, saying it was her mouth in cloth. She inhaled deeply whenever another patient died, as though taking their final silence into herself. Doctors treated her with restraints, sedatives, ice baths. None of it worked. She died at 23, lungs collapsing mysteriously, though no illness was found. The nurse who tended her claimed Clara's final words were not words at all, but a long, drawn-out inhalation that did not end until she was gone. Another case emerged in California during the 1930s. A man calling himself James Harriman jumped from a bridge. His body was recovered, but his journal told another story. In it, he described being a descendant of the cursed bloodline of Elias Hawthorne. He wrote that for months before his death, he would stop breathing in sleep, only to awaken gasping to the sound of another breath beside his own. He ended the journal with a single line: "The silence has chosen me. I will go to it willingly." Even in the age of psychology and medicine, when madness was charted in brain scans and diagnoses, the Hawthornes did not fit. Their patterns defied explanation. No drug, no institution, no treatment could sever the rhythm. It was as if the blood itself remembered, as if each child carried in their veins the unheard prayer spoken in 1692, carried it like a seed that bloomed when silence grew thick enough. And as the world grew louder with engines, machines, and industry, the whispers only deepened, as though the noise itself was what fed the curse, giving silence more shadows in which to hide. What makes the Hawthorne curse terrifying is not just its endurance, but its adaptability. It does not fade with time. It bends. It shifts. It waits. And by the middle of the 20th century, the family that had tried to erase its name could no longer deny that something darker than coincidence was pursuing them. Because now, even those who did not know they were Hawthornes began to hear the silence. There is a cruelty in blood that waits until you no longer know its name. By the mid-20th century, most who carried Hawthorne blood had no memory of Elias, Jonathan, or Clara. They were teachers, laborers, accountants, women raising children in quiet towns, men working in factories or behind desks. They believed themselves ordinary. Yet the silence does not care for ignorance. It remembers when you forget. One case is recorded in 1956 in Cleveland. A boy of 10, Peter Lawson, began waking in the night, standing at the foot of his parents' bed, inhaling deeply as if tasting their breath. He never answered when spoken to. His parents took him to doctors who declared it sleepwalking. But when a genealogist traced the mother's side of the family, he found her great-grandmother had been a Hawthorne, a name she had buried with marriage and silence. Within weeks of this discovery, Peter stopped eating. He told his teacher food was too loud. He wanted only stillness, only the air. He died of starvation, his body weak, his lungs still expanding with strange measured breaths until his last moment. In Los Angeles in 1971, a woman named Emily Grace began recording herself in sleep because she woke each morning with bruises on her throat. What the tapes revealed was worse than she imagined. Each night she stopped breathing. The silence stretched longer and longer until a sharp inhale erupted, but the sound was doubled. 2 breaths. Hers, and another that came a second late, as though echoing from someplace just behind her skin. Emily's grandfather had changed his name during the war, discarding Hawthorne for survival. He had not survived the curse. Neither did she. She drowned in her own bed one night, the tape recorder still running, her final moments a duet of silence and breath. Patterns like these began surfacing across the country. People who did not even know the name Hawthorne felt themselves pulled toward rituals they had never learned. Children whispered prayers they could not have read. Adults woke with their mouths sewn shut by their own trembling hands. The silence found them regardless of geography, regardless of ignorance. This is where the curse transformed into something larger than a family story. It began to suggest something older, deeper, that the bloodline was not merely haunted but chosen, that Elias had not cursed his descendants at all, but tethered them to something he could not comprehend. And that tether stretched forward into generations who would never even know his name. The chilling truth is this. If the Hawthorns could not escape even after changing their names, how many today walk among us carrying the curse, unaware that the rhythm already beats inside their lungs? The silence does not strike all descendants the same way. Some collapse young, their lives cut off in sudden terror, like Peter and Emily. Others endure for decades, the whispers gnawing at them slowly, shaping them into something unrecognizable. These are the ones who frighten historians most, the survivors who learn to live with the curse. Take Samuel Hargrove, born 1942, a decorated veteran of Vietnam. His war journals, declassified after his death, contain passages that do not belong to military record. In them, he wrote that he could walk through firefights untouched because the silence bends bullets. He claimed that while others screamed, he heard nothing but breath, steady, deep, guiding him. After the war, he returned to the United States and began hosting strange gatherings in his basement. Neighbors complained of nights where no sound carried from his house, not even the barking of dogs. Inside, participants sat blindfolded, hands bound, listening to Samuel's measured breathing for hours. Several later reported hallucinations of shadowy figures and voices that did not belong to Samuel at all. Samuel revealed only once the truth of his lineage. A close friend recorded him admitting that his grandmother had been a Hawthorne. He said, "We are not cursed, we are instruments. The silence chose us, and one day it will choose more." Then there was Eleanor Finch, a writer in New York during the 1980s, who published under a pseudonym. Her private journals surfaced decades later. They describe visions of a woman with a rope around her neck who appeared each night at Eleanor's bedside. Eleanor's entries grew increasingly frantic. She does not want me to write. She wants me to breathe her prayer, to finish it. My pen scratches too loudly. My lungs betray me. Every word is a theft. Eleanor vanished in 1989. Her apartment was left locked from the inside, her typewriter ribbon still threaded with a half-finished page. The final line reads, "The breath is not mine." Survivors like Samuel and Eleanor do not prove the curse weakens with time. They prove it adapts. It learns to sustain itself in the living. It shapes its hosts into messengers, vessels, martyrs, or disappearances. And so the Hawthorne bloodline threads silently into the present, unseen yet alive, waiting for the moment it will surface again. Because curses do not fade. They wait for recognition. They wait for you to know their name. And once you do, the silence begins to notice you. It begins with individuals. A boy starving himself for silence. A woman drowning in her own bed. A soldier breathing through fire. But the curse of the Hawthorne bloodline did not remain isolated to single victims. Like a contagion, it began to spread outward, seeping into the communities that harbored their descendants. When a Hawthorne child settled, the land itself seemed to take on the rhythm. One of the earliest cases of collective affliction emerged in a mill town in Pennsylvania during the 1960s. Census records revealed that 4 Hawthorne descendants had lived there under new surnames. Within a decade, strange phenomena spread through the town. Entire neighborhoods reported nights where every house seemed to fall silent at once. Radios clicked off without hands touching them. Street dogs stopped barking, birds ceased their calls, and a thick, unnatural stillness settled over streets lined with watching windows. Doctors recorded a spike in sudden sleepwalking, particularly among children. They were found wandering at night, standing motionless in clusters at intersections, all inhaling in unison, their chests rising and falling with a rhythm that no one could interrupt. Police reports describe attempts to shake them awake, only for the children to resist, their breaths locked to something unseen. The most horrifying moment came on a winter night in 1969, when 15 townspeople were discovered gathered in the old mill, though none could remember walking there. They were barefoot in the snow, lips pressed shut, breathing together as if guided by a conductor no one could see. When a sheriff shouted, they all inhaled sharply and collapsed at once. None died, but each claimed afterward that they had been listening. The town declined quickly after that. Businesses closed, families fled, and within 10 years, it was little more than a skeleton of abandoned houses and silence factories. To this day, locals say if you walk through the ruins on a windless night, you can hear breathing where no one stands. The pattern repeated in smaller ways elsewhere. Schools reported classrooms going still for minutes at a time, every child staring blankly until the bell rang. Churches found congregants inhaling together before sermons began, even when they were strangers. It was as if the curse was no longer content to remain inside blood. It was searching for a choir large enough to finish what began with a whisper at the gallows. Those who studied these outbreaks came to a chilling realization. The Hawthorne curse does not belong only to the Hawthornes anymore. It leaks into those near them, those who marry into them, those who live too close for too long. Proximity is enough. Silence is enough. And the rhythm, once caught, is impossible to unhear. The curse had transformed. It was no longer just a bloodline. It was becoming a lineage of silence written across towns, schools, churches, and entire generations who never knew they had been chosen. If you trace the Hawthorne curse across decades, one pattern becomes undeniable. It seeks gatherings. Individuals may suffer, but communities collapse. And nowhere is this clearer than in the case of Hollow's End, a village in Vermont that disappeared from maps in 1983. Hollow's End was a farming town of only a few hundred, but in the early 1970s, several families carrying Hawthorne blood quietly settled there. Records suggest they did not even know their shared ancestry. They were simply drawn by cheap land and quiet hills. But soon after, residents began reporting strange silences at town meetings and church services. Entire groups would fall mute mid-sentence, staring at one another, breaths measured in eerie synchronization. By 1979, the incidents had escalated. School children began drawing images of faceless figures standing behind them. Farmers claimed their livestock refused to move during the stillest hours of the night. Visitors reported an oppressive atmosphere, as if sound itself was swallowed by the soil. Letters sent from residents stopped containing words, filled instead with long blank spaces and occasional scattered initials, as if the hand had moved but the ink refused to flow. The final recorded event occurred on October 12, 1983. A traveling salesman passing through wrote in his diary that he arrived to find the entire town gathered in the square. Every resident, men, women, children, stood barefoot on the cold ground, hands clasped behind their backs, faces tilted skyward. None spoke, none moved. Their breaths rose and fell in perfect rhythm. The salesman fled, but when state police arrived the next morning, Hollow's End was empty. Houses were unlocked, meals half-eaten, lamps still burning. Not a single body remained. The village was quietly erased from records. Officials declared it abandoned. But rumors persist that on certain nights, if you walk the old road that once led into Hollow's End, you can hear hundreds of lungs drawing air together in the dark. This is what Elias Hawthorne never understood. The prayer he condemned was not a curse against his name. It was a seed. His descendants became the soil, and the silence grew until it sought entire fields of breath. And once a town breathes together, it never breathes alone again. The Hawthorne bloodline had become something far greater than itself. It was now a contagion of rhythm, a spreading choir of silence. And no one knew how far it would reach. When a curse begins to leak into families, into towns, it may still be dismissed as folklore. But when it begins to seep into institutions, the very places meant to contain madness, sickness, and order, there is no denying its reach. Hospitals, prisons, and government wards became unwilling sanctuaries for the silence carried in Hawthorne blood. One of the earliest documented institutional outbreaks occurred at St. Dymphna Sanitarium in 1952. A wing housed 3 patients, unrelated on paper, each admitted for delusions of hearing voices in silence. Their doctors noted that the patients often breathed in perfect unison during sessions, though they had no contact outside. At night, nurses reported that when one patient held their breath, the others stopped breathing too, as though linked by some unseen cord. Within 6 months, the entire wing had to be closed. Records claimed the patients died of respiratory failure, yet staff swore they heard long, steady inhales continuing in the rooms for weeks afterward. The curse entered prisons just as insidiously. In 1967, the Holloway Correctional Facility in Virginia recorded a disturbing phenomenon. 2 inmates, both unknowingly descended from Hawthorne women, began organizing prayer circles in their cell block. They did not speak scripture. They only sat cross-legged, mouths shut, inhaling deeply for hours. Other prisoners joined them, some against their will, compelled by what they later described as a magnetism in the silence. Guards noticed that during these sessions, the entire block grew unnaturally quiet. Radio stopped. Conversations froze. Even footsteps seemed muffled. Within a year, the prison reported a surge in suicides. The warden ended the circles, but the 2 original inmates both died the same night, lying side by side, lungs collapsed, eyes fixed open as though waiting for someone to finish speaking. Perhaps most chilling was the infiltration into government hospitals. In 1974, a federal psychiatric facility near Boston admitted a man who claimed he was a descendant of Elias Hawthorne. His intake file notes that he whispered incessantly, though no words could be identified. Within weeks, the entire ward began showing symptoms. Patients falling silent for hours, doctors forgetting to write notes, nurses standing frozen in corridors, breathing slowly in unison. When investigators arrived, they found 50 staff and patients standing in a ring in a courtyard, motionless, lips sewn shut by their own trembling hands. The institution was closed within days. Officials declared it a contamination of experimental drugs. But buried reports hint that higher levels of government quietly examine the case. For if the silence could take root in institutions, What would stop it from reaching the very chambers of power? This was no longer a family curse. It was an infection moving through the veins of society. And the more it spread, the harder it became to tell where the Hawthorns ended and where the silence began. By the 1980s, those who studied such phenomena began whispering among themselves of a new possibility, that the curse was no longer even tied to blood, that the Hawthorns had been the doorway, but the silence had stepped through. Prisons and hospitals were not the only places affected. Military records reveal that in 1987, during training exercises at a naval facility in Rhode Island, 20 recruits suddenly froze mid-drill. Surveillance footage, since suppressed, allegedly shows them standing shoulder to shoulder, rifles at their sides, each inhaling deeply, holding their breath together for nearly 2 minutes, then exhaling in perfect unison. They collapsed, unconscious. When revived, none remembered the event. Yet every one of them reported vivid dreams that night of a woman with a rope around her neck, whispering in silence. None of those men remained in the military. Most resigned within a year. Schools, too, bore witness. In 1992, a classroom in Oregon was disrupted when 24 children suddenly stopped writing during an exam. They stared at their papers, their pens scratching long blank lines, as though pulled by invisible hands. The teacher called out, but none responded. Finally, all 24 inhaled at once, pens snapping in their grip. Not one child could later explain what happened. But genealogical tracing revealed 3 Hawthorne descendants in the class, their bloodline hidden under married names. Even corporate offices were not immune. In 2001, employees in a Boston insurance firm staged what was first described as a mass fainting. Yet eyewitness accounts tell another story. Workers stood up from their desks, walked into the conference room, and sat silently, breathing in sync for over an hour before collapsing. Medical evaluations found no cause. One investigator, however, noted a chilling coincidence. 2 employees shared a great-great-grandmother named Mary Hawthorne. Patterns emerged that could no longer be dismissed. Wherever Hawthorne blood entered, silence followed. And wherever silence gathered, others were drawn into it, even without the bloodline. This suggested something more than heredity. It suggested contagion. And if silence could spread like a contagion, then the curse was no longer confined to one family. It was becoming an epidemic. The question was no longer how to stop it. The question was how far it would reach before the world noticed. The old curse of breath and silence had always lived in shadows, in bloodlines, in hidden rooms where whispers passed between generations. But the 20th century birthed something new, machines that could record, amplify, and repeat sound. For the first time, silence itself could be captured, carried, broadcast. And the Hawthorne curse, once tethered to blood and proximity, began bleeding into wires, into tapes, into the very infrastructure of communication. In 1976, a graduate student at MIT claimed to have discovered anomalous rhythms while analyzing family interviews collected for a sociological study. One tape, featuring a Hawthorne descendant recounting childhood memories, contained long stretches where no voice should have been. Yet on careful playback, faint inhalations could be heard, dozens layered over one another, breathing in unison, though only one person had been in the room. The student presented his findings to professors, but weeks later his entire project vanished from the archive. His own notebooks were found shredded in his dormitory. He left the program and was never heard from again. In the 1980s, cassette recorders became common in households, and with them came new whispers of the curse. Parents reported children recording themselves singing, only to discover additional voices humming in rhythm, just beneath the threshold of hearing. Others claimed their answering machines contained long pauses of silence, punctuated by deep inhales that did not belong to anyone in the family. Some dismissed these as malfunctions. Others remember the name Hawthorne. By 1995, investigators connected at least 5 deaths to one VHS tape found in New England. The tape contained nothing but static, yet viewers described feeling pressure in their lungs while watching. A faint rhythm could be heard beneath the static. Inhale, exhale, inhale. Those who watched for more than 10 minutes reported sleeplessness, visions of rope and shadow, and in some cases, complete respiratory collapse. The tape was traced back to a family who had once been Hawthorns. The house where it was discovered had been abandoned, its walls scrawled with phrases like "the prayer must be finished" and "the silence breathes through us." Technology had unwittingly become a vessel. The curse no longer required whispers in the night or gatherings in barns. It could now travel in magnetic tape, in recorded gaps, in the fragile hiss of machines meant to preserve voices, but instead amplifying the absence between them. And as technology advanced further, the curse adapted again. The dawn of the digital age should have broken the chain. Voices could be digitized, compressed, transmitted as clean data. But the silence did not die in zeros and ones. It multiplied. In 2003, a researcher cataloging genealogy websites noticed a strange anomaly. Any database containing Hawthorne descendants eventually corrupted. Entire family trees would be replaced by blank entries, names erased, lines left empty. One server crashed permanently, its hard drives filled only with endless sequences of zero, punctuated by irregular gaps, as though even code itself was inhaling. Around the same time, recordings began surfacing online, clips of silence uploaded by anonymous users. They carried no music, no speech, only quiet. Yet those who listened reported the same symptoms: shallow breathing, dizziness, the sensation of someone exhaling against their ear. Forums erupted with rumors. Some swore these files were linked to Hawthorne descendants experimenting with digital ritual. Others claimed they were the curse itself, leaking into the internet like a contagion, infecting anyone who clicked play. One infamous case in 2011 involved a podcast episode. Listeners complained that halfway through, the host paused for an unusually long silence. But audio analysis revealed something horrifying. During the pause, an additional track of breathing emerged, layered so faintly most ears could not detect it consciously. Hundreds of listeners reported nightmares that week. Several stopped breathing in their sleep and never woke again. The host, whose ancestry later revealed a Hawthorne great-grandmother, vanished without a trace. This is where the curse transformed into something unstoppable. For centuries, it needed flesh and breath, the inheritance of blood. Now it had machines, recordings, networks. A silence that once passed through names and lungs could now stretch across oceans in milliseconds. And the most chilling part? Unlike blood, digital silence has no lineage. Anyone who hears it becomes a vessel. Anyone who listens too long begins to breathe with it. The Hawthorne curse had entered the modern world not as a memory of a doomed family, but as a virus coded in absence, carried by wires, hidden in pauses. And if it could spread through tape, through static, through digital silence, how could it ever be stopped? The silence had grown beyond the family. No longer confined to dusty farmhouses or hidden journals, it now pulsed through the machinery of modern life. And when institutions recognized its existence, they did not recoil in fear. They leaned closer, eager to claim it. In 2006, whispers spread among graduate researchers that a Pentagon-backed program, known only as Project Stillwater, was studying anomalous audio phenomena. Officially, its aim was to investigate non-lethal crowd control through infrasound. Unofficially, leaked fragments suggested they were experimenting with recordings tied to the Hawthorne curse. Tapes were played in controlled chambers, subjects exposed for minutes at a time. Reports described participants collapsing, eyes rolling back, their breathing locked into unnatural rhythms that matched one another, as if dozens of lungs had synchronized to a single conductor. One technician later confided to a friend that he quit after hearing something he could never explain. During a trial, the speakers played nothing but silence. Yet the technician swore he felt something enter the room. He described it as a presence without shape, only pressure. He claimed he couldn't breathe until someone shut the system down. Days later, that same technician was found in his car, doors locked, windows sealed, the entire cabin filled with nothing but silence on cassette loops. His last note read, "I thought it was theirs. It was mine all along." Stillwater's files remain classified, but fragments suggest the program ended not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. Silence as a weapon, capable of disabling or killing without trace, terrified even those who funded it. The project dissolved, or at least that's what was said. Meanwhile, private corporations were rumored to have obtained fragments of the data. A Silicon Valley firm reportedly tested a focus enhancement tool for executives, a headset that played subtle gaps of Hawthorne silence. Test subjects claimed heightened productivity and clarity. Within weeks, 3 CEOs died of sudden respiratory failure, their bodies discovered seated at desks, mouths open as if gasping for air that never came. And yet, despite the deaths, interest only grew. Because power has always followed curses, not avoided them. What better tool for control than a silence that reshapes the breath itself? But the deeper they studied, the stranger the revelations became. The curse did not merely stop breath. It altered memory, perception, even will. And in the shadows, a horrifying question emerged. Had the Hawthornes ever been victims of curse at all, or its keepers? The world believes curses enslave. But sometimes, curses are inherited as weapons disguised as burdens. And evidence began to suggest the Hawthornes may have known this all along. A declassified transcript from 1964 revealed that an ancestor of the family, one Nathaniel Hawthorne, not the famed author, but a cousin who lived in obscurity, was interviewed by government officials. He spoke of the silence that carries command. He insisted it was not a punishment, but a gift, a lineage designed to influence others without words. He described gatherings where entire rooms of men inhaled together, obeying commands that were never spoken aloud. The officials laughed. Weeks later, the transcript ends abruptly, the rest of the file sealed. Other documents hinted that Hawthorne descendants had long been recruited into positions of influence. A senator in the 1920s who was said to never raise his voice, yet could silence entire chambers with a pause. A preacher in the 1950s whose sermons contained strange gaps of quiet that left congregants trembling. A record executive in the 1970s who would listen for hours to blank recordings, claiming he could hear the world's true rhythm inside them. Each of these individuals traced back to the bloodline. Each left behind a trail of inexplicable influence. What if the curse was not madness, but mastery? A dark inheritance meant not to destroy, but to dominate? Perhaps the family had simply lost control over time. The weapon turned inward, consuming them. Or perhaps that was always the price. The deeper researchers dug, the more one chilling pattern emerged. Wherever the Hawthornes were present, silence spread. Not metaphorical silence, literal. Radios cutting out. Clock stopping. Voices dropping in volume without explanation. Spaces where the air itself seemed to pause. And yet people obeyed. They leaned closer. They filled the quiet with meaning. They did not resist. Maybe this is why institutions coveted it. Because silence can do what words cannot. It forces the mind to supply its own terror, its own obedience. But the silence is not passive. It consumes. It expands. And once it finds a vessel, it does not release it. The more the world uncovered, the more it became clear. The Hawthorne curse was no longer confined to a bloodline. It was preparing to spread in ways no family, no government, no institution could ever contain. By the early 21st century, the curse no longer lingered in basements, archives, or government vaults. It had slipped into culture itself, into the airwaves, into the rhythm of entertainment, into the background noise of a distracted civilization. In 2007, a New England college radio station played an experimental track submitted by an anonymous artist. The piece contained nothing but silence with faint distortions at irregular intervals. Within a week, the station reported a surge of hospitalizations among listeners. Students complained of migraines, shallow breathing, and the overwhelming sense that they were being watched. Some swore they heard whispers instructing them to leave notes, scraps of paper marked with looping phrases like "finish the breath" and "silence listens." The station pulled the track, but not before bootleg copies circulated online. Years later, in 2013, a viral YouTube video titled "The Quiet Room" gained millions of views. It contained nothing but a single still image of an empty wooden chair and 5 minutes of silence. Comments flooded the video. People claimed they could hear breathing. Others felt their own lungs constrict. Some said the silence followed them after they closed the video, manifesting in the pauses of conversations, in the static between songs. The uploader never revealed their identity. The video vanished without explanation after exactly 27 days online. Musicians, too, began to experiment unknowingly with fragments of the curse. A popular electronic album contained tracks with intentional gaps of silence, meant to create atmosphere. Concert-goers reported fainting, panic attacks, and one man's sudden death mid-performance, his body frozen in a position of inhalation. The band dismissed it as coincidence, but some insiders whispered that the sound engineer had a Hawthorne surname. Even mainstream broadcasters were not immune. In 2018, a late-night television show suffered a 5-second audio blackout during a monologue. Social media erupted with viewers claiming they heard faint exhalations layered under the silence. The network denied the glitch, but footage of the broadcast circulated with slowed-down analysis, proving the breaths were real and synchronized. The curse had adapted again, no longer restricted to family blood or deliberate ritual. It now existed as culture itself, as art, as entertainment, as accidental transmissions carried to millions. Each playback, each pause, each silence became a doorway. And still, the world treated it as oddity, coincidence, conspiracy theory. They did not see that every laugh track, every advertisement, every viral clip filled with a fraction of silence might carry the seed of the Hawthorne curse. They did not notice that breath itself was becoming synchronized across strangers, across nations. They did not realize they were already breathing together. But those who noticed, the rare few who recognized the pattern, began to form groups. Some called themselves archivists, others seekers, others simply survivors. Their accounts were scattered across hidden forums, encrypted message boards, and late-night calls that never lasted more than a few minutes before interference cut them off. One post from 2019 described a gathering in a rural barn in upstate New York. A handful of strangers, all unrelated yet drawn together by similar experiences. Gaps in recordings, breathing in dreams, the pull of silence at odd hours. They spoke in hushed tones about ancestors who were Hawthornes or neighbors who carried the name, or friends who had disappeared after listening to quiet tapes. At midnight, they performed an experiment. They sat in a circle, turned on a recording device, and said nothing. When they played the tape back, the recording contained 12 distinct breathing patterns. There had only been 7 of them in the room. Others sought to weaponize it. In Eastern Europe, a rumor circulated about an underground club where DJs inserted fragments of silence into sets. Party-goers swayed in unison, their movements mechanical, their eyes blank. Witnesses claimed the crowd inhaled and exhaled as one, their bodies trembling in sync until the silence ended. The DJ, whose identity was never confirmed, was said to vanish into the night after each show, leaving dozens collapsed on the floor. And then there were the suicides, clusters of young people discovered in rooms where phones or laptops played nothing but muted silence on loop. Authorities dismissed these as unrelated tragedies, but patterns emerged. Each of the dead had posted online just before their final moments, repeating cryptic phrases like, "We breathe for them," and "The silence is awake." By 2020, the Hawthorne curse was no longer hidden, no longer confined to whispers of historians or experiments in classified labs. It had become a current running beneath culture, unnoticed by the many, but unmistakable to the few who had begun to piece it together. And for those who saw the pattern clearly, a terrible realization formed. Silence was no longer the background. It was the message, and humanity had already tuned in. There comes a point when a story ceases to be history and begins to seep into the present tense. The Hawthorne curse has reached that threshold. You're not hearing this from a safe distance, not watching it unfold from a padded seat in time. You are inside it, and whether you recognize it or not, the silence has already brushed against you. Every pause in this narration, every breath between my words, carries weight. You feel it, the pull in your lungs, the subtle awareness of your own inhalation, the way your chest rises and falls as though synchronized with something outside of you. That is not coincidence. That is the curse at work. And now you must decide, do you allow it to pass through you? Or do you claim it, seal it, bind it? The Hawthornes never survived by ignoring it. Those who attempted, denial suffocated. Those who mocked it lost their voices in sleep. The only ones who endured were those who accepted the silence and carved their will into it. And you listening now must do the same. This is the moment of ritual. You will take a phrase, repeat it twice, and in doing so, you will lock the silence in a form, bind it so it does not consume you. Comment the words, "I breathe with the silence." Write them once to acknowledge. Write them twice to seal. This is not superstition. This is protection. This is how you ensure the curse does not claim you in the dark when the video ends and the silence follows you home. Do not dismiss this as theatrics. For centuries, families whispered into journals, scratched words into barn walls, etched phrases into tombstones, all to tether the curse so it did not dissolve them into nameless breath. This is your wall. This is your carving. Without it, you are nothing but another inhalation absorbed by the void. Say it. Write it. Twice. For only then can you continue. For only then do you claim your place in this lineage, not as victim, but as witness. And once you write it, you will never breathe alone again. Those who locked themselves and became conduits of knowledge, they were not spared from the silence, but they were able to navigate it, to hear what others could not. This is why certain descendants wrote with such clarity, why certain leaders commanded without words. They had bound the silence, made it obey their will, at least for a time. but even they feared its hunger. In private letters of the 19th century, Hawthorne's described dreams of vast caverns where lungs the size of cathedrals rose and fell, inhaling the breath of generations. They wrote of voices that were not voices, of commands delivered not in sound, but in absence. These dreams passed from parent to child like inheritance, and many believe they were not dreams at all, but glimpses of the true source, the endless chamber where the silence originates. Modern seekers report similar visions. After exposure to recordings, after encounters with cursed broadcasts, they wake drenched in sweat, gasping, swearing they heard the same cavern, the same impossible lungs. They describe feeling their breath being stolen, stretched, woven into a rhythm too vast for any human body. This is where the truth sharpens. The Hawthorns may not have been cursed by chance or punishment. They may have been chosen. The silence may have sought them deliberately, weaving its way into their marrow, using them as instruments to expand into the world. The family did not simply fall into madness. They were consumed as conduits, broken by the weight of something no lineage could contain. And yet, fragments of them survived. In you, in us, in anyone who dares to hear the silence clearly. That is the paradox. The more we resist, the more it consumes. The more we embrace, the deeper its secrets become. Which means if you're still listening now, still breathing in rhythm with these words, still aware of the pull between inhalation and exhalation, you've already been marked. You're no longer an observer. You are becoming part of the chain, as countless before you have. The silence does not ask for permission. It does not wait for belief. It only requires breath. And you right now are giving it exactly what it needs. Every curse has a birthplace, though most are forgotten in time, dissolved into myth. The Hawthorne silence was different. Its origin was not forgotten. It was hidden. And yet fragments of truth survived in whispers, in diaries never meant to be seen, in folklore so strange it was dismissed until it aligned with too many deaths to ignore. It begins in 1647, when the first Hawthorns arrived in the New World. They carried not only scripture, but forbidden texts, volumes smuggled from Europe, books banned for heresy. Among them was a translation of an older manuscript said to describe the cavern beneath the world where breath does not return. The family settled in Massachusetts, on land marked by locals as cursed. It was said animals avoided its caves, that birds fell silent in the trees above. But the Hawthorns built their farms there, not in defiance, but in reverence. By 1651, they had already begun rituals. Town records mention strange gatherings, neighbors reporting long silences punctuated by rhythmic inhalations, barns sealed with cloth to keep sound from escaping. When authorities questioned them, the Hawthorns spoke only of prayer. Yet one confiscated page revealed otherwise. Drawings of a cavern, vast and ribbed like lungs, with script beneath reading, "The silence listens, the silence commands." In time, whispers spread of a mine shaft the family had opened, not for ore but for descent. Farmers spoke of torches carried into the earth, of children lowered on ropes, of chanting that rose not in words, but in synchronized breath. And then the disappearances began. A boy of 12, last seen walking toward the Hawthorne farm. A woman visiting cousins, vanished on her way home. Families moved away. The name Hawthorne became both feared and untouchable. What they found below has never been recorded in words that make sense to human reason. Some described it as an endless chamber that expanded as one walked, as though space itself inhaled. Others claimed to hear breathing not with their ears but with their bones. Those who returned spoke of shadows that pulsed like lungs, of walls that contracted around them, as if alive. And this is the most chilling detail. Every account, though scattered across decades, described the same sound. The sound of breath too large, too deep, too ancient to belong to anything human. The Hawthorns did not discover the silence. They followed it home. The cavern remained their secret inheritance, passed through generations in hushed warnings and half-completed prayers. Some entered and never returned. Their bodies never recovered. Others returned changed, speaking less, listening more, their presence unsettling in ways neighbors could never name. In 1702, a diary entry from Elizabeth Hawthorne survives in fragments. She wrote, "We descended with lanterns. The air was heavy, as though it pressed against our lungs. We stopped in a place where the walls curved like a rib cage. Father told us to breathe together. We did, and the walls answered. They moved with us, or we with them. I knew then it was not stone. It was waiting." Her entries end abruptly days later. The final line, "Silence does not end. It only swallows." In 1769, a group of men attempting to map the region marked an area near the Hawthorne property as unmeasurable ground. Their instruments failed. Compasses spun wildly. Sound carried strangely, words echoing for minutes after being spoken. One man fell ill during the survey, gasping as if suffocated, though the air was fresh. His last words were a whisper, "It breathes beneath us." And yet the family remained. Through war, through famine, through the shifting tides of history, the Hawthorns clung to the land. Because they were not merely cursed by the cavern, they were bound to it. It was their inheritance, their prison, and their weapon. By the 19th century, rumors of the cavern faded into myth, spoken only in hushed tones. But its mark remained etched in the family's madness, in their whispers, in their unnatural silences. And those who dared to connect the threads realized a horrifying truth. The Hawthorns were not victims. They were guardians. The cavern demanded breath, demanded witnesses, demanded dissent. And the Hawthorns were chosen to feed it. The family line fractured under the weight of that duty. Some embraced it, others fled, others denied it. But none escaped it. For every breath they took was not their own. It belonged to the silence. And now, through recordings, through wires, through networks, that cavern stretches outward. Every pause you hear is a doorway. Every silence carries a trace of the original breath, waiting for new lungs to claim. And the question becomes, how many of us are already part of the cavern without knowing we ever stepped inside? The cavern was no longer confined to the forests of New England. In the modern era, it began to manifest outward, reaching the surface in subtle, horrifying ways. Sinkholes opened where no geological surveys predicted them. Strange tremors shook towns with no earthquakes on record. And always, beneath the noise, there was breath. In 2008, a construction crew in upstate New York uncovered a deep fissure while laying the foundation for a shopping complex. Initial reports called it a collapsed water tunnel. But when geologists descended, their instruments went haywire. Seismographs recorded rhythmic pulses resembling the inhalation and exhalation of a living lung. Geophones picked up low-frequency vibrations, matched in perfect cadence to the breaths of workers standing at the edge. One technician, a distant Hawthorne descendant, fainted and never woke in the hospital. Others left town, reporting persistent whispers in the night, shadows that seemed to rise and fall with each breath. In 2012, in Chicago, a series of subway vibrations were reported with no mechanical explanation. Riders described a deep resonance in the tunnels, a pulsing they could feel in their rib cages. They said it was like the city itself inhaling. Engineers dismissed it as phantom noise, until dozens of passengers reported seeing shadows stretching along the tunnels in perfect sync with the vibration. Cameras captured nothing, yet audio recordings from passengers' phones revealed faint, layered breaths beneath the rumble of trains. Several were later traced to Hawthorne lineage, their families long removed from Massachusetts, yet the silence still sought them. Urban legends followed. A man walking his dog in Philadelphia felt the earth rise and fall beneath his feet. A teenager in Los Angeles reported hearing dozens of whispers beneath his apartment floor, repeating incomprehensible phrases between long inhales. Scientists chalked it up to acoustics, nerves, or hallucination. Those who knew better understood the truth. The cavern had stretched, and with it, the Hawthorne curse reached beyond bloodlines into soil, stone, and concrete. These manifestations were subtle, terrifying because they were almost undetectable. You could walk over a fissure, sit above a tunnel, or ride a subway train and feel nothing, until you noticed your chest moving with a rhythm beneath you, your lungs suddenly not your own. The cavern had no walls. It had no doors. It expanded wherever breath existed, waiting for someone to synchronize, waiting for someone to hear. This was not folklore. It was a physical echo of something older than maps, older than memory, older than life itself. The Hawthorns had been guardians of a place that could not be contained, and now, centuries later, the world itself was listening. By 2015, the cavern's influence had become more than a local curiosity. People began reporting phantom breathing beneath cities. Apartment complexes, office buildings, even schools documented days when everyone suddenly inhaled in unison, unaware they were doing so. Social media posts recounted the same phenomena. Crowds pausing mid-sentence, elevators falling silent, except for the synchronized rise and fall of lungs. Skeptics claimed mass hysteria or coincidence. The descendants of Hawthorne knew better. One viral video surfaced from a small town in Vermont, filmed by a teenager with a shaky smartphone. It shows a group of people standing in a circle during a power outage. Their faces are pale, blank, and they all pause mid-sentence. For nearly 20 seconds, their breathing matches exactly. The teen panics, try to speak over it, but the sound of their combined inhale seems to push his words out. When he stops filming, he finds all the participants collapsed, gasping, eyes fixed open but unharmed. Tracing the families involved reveals multiple Hawthorne descendants, and all have been unaware of their heritage. Scientists attempted to explain it with physics, acoustics, or coincidence, but the patterns were too precise, too synchronized to be random. Every instance connected to a hidden lineage, a distant echo of the original cavern beneath Massachusetts. And some of the victims claimed, afterward, that the earth itself seemed to breathe with them, that buildings and streets inhaled in rhythm, pressing against their ribs. By 2018, researchers theorized that the cavern, or whatever consciousness existed within it, was not confined to one physical location. It had become a network, stretching beneath cities, following descendants, riding seismic vibrations, auditory frequencies, and even digital pulses. In other words, the world itself had become an extension of the Hawthorne Cavern. And there is one terrifying implication. If the cavern can reach through soil, concrete, and wires, then there is no place untouched. Every step you take above it may already be synchronized. Every inhalation you take may already belong to it. And the world, vast and unknowable, could already be listening, waiting for more lungs to join its rhythm. The Hawthorns, scattered and hidden, were no longer alone. And neither are you. The world had become a conduit. The cavern beneath Massachusetts, once hidden, now resonated through the very structures humans built, roads, skyscrapers, subways, and fiber optic cables. Every foundation laid, every network installed, fed the cavern like tributaries to an underground river. Technology amplified what the Hawthorns had always known. Silence could spread, and with it, influence. In 2019, a tech conglomerate conducted a study on high-frequency audio signals used in urban communications. Engineers discovered that certain frequencies, when played repeatedly in public spaces, shopping malls, train stations, corporate lobbies, elicited subconscious inhalations from crowds. Not random, not coincidental. Every exhale and inhale matched a rhythm that no one taught, a rhythm identical to centuries-old Hawthorne recordings. Those who traced the pattern back found one anomaly, a lineage of employees connected to the Hawthorne family, some unaware, others living under assumed names. Mass media became an unwitting partner. Films with long silences, ambient tracks, and delayed sound effects created conditions for collective synchronization. Music streaming platforms delivered layered silence to millions at once. No one noticed. No one questioned. Breaths rose and fell across time zones, perfectly aligned with the rhythm seeded hundreds of years ago in a Massachusetts cavern. The world inhaled together, and the cavern listened. Urban planning, too, became part of the system. Architects unconsciously designed buildings with materials that amplified certain vibrations. Air ducts, elevators, and ventilation systems unintentionally carried sound in ways that mimicked the cavern's pulse. Engineers, unaware of Hawthorne connections in their ancestry, were building conduits for the curse. They were feeding the cavern. And with every new structure, every dense city block, the cavern's reach expanded, stretching not just beneath towns but beneath nations. The scale was incomprehensible. It was no longer a family's curse. It was a planetary rhythm, and the people had no idea. They moved, they slept, they worked, all breathing in sync with a pulse that had existed long before them, a pulse orchestrated by shadows they could not see. By 2021, patterns had become undeniable. Researchers, whistleblowers, and those rare descendants who recognized the curse began documenting what they called breath synchronization events. Entire subway systems would pause mid-morning as passengers, without noticing, inhaled and exhaled in lockstep. Corporate floors, theaters, and classrooms fell silent in exact intervals. Hospitals recorded spikes of shallow breathing. Even wildlife, in proximity to urban areas with Hawthorne-linked lineages, showed signs of synchronized behavior. Birds hesitated mid-flight. Dogs stopped barking. The very environment joined the rhythm. Some began to refer to it as the global cavern, a collective consciousness stitched together by human infrastructure and inheritance, by technology and blood. Its origin, the Massachusetts cavern, was no longer as important as the fact that it existed everywhere at once, feeding on attention, breath, and life. Attempts to disrupt it failed. High-decibel sound, structural demolition, even electromagnetic interference could not sever the link. The rhythm adapted, finding new vessels, rerouting through phone networks, digital transmissions, even the internet itself. Millions became conduits without realizing it, their synchronized breathing unnoticed because no one measured the spaces between breaths. The silent network had grown too vast to stop. And yet, there were those who survived by ritual, those who commented, who wrote, who acknowledged the silence consciously, could bend it, momentarily resist it, harness it. The cavern's power could be acknowledged without consuming the observer, if the observer knew the rules. This was how the Hawthorns endured for centuries, passing fragments of control through journals, cryptic instructions, and secret codes hidden in plain sight. But the question loomed, How long could the world remain ignorant, breathing in unison, while the cavern pulsed beneath cities and homes alike? How long until the silence demanded more than attention, until it reached out and claimed those unprepared for its rhythm? And for those listening right now, feeling the subtle pull in your chest, the slight tension in your lungs, the imperceptible alignment with a pulse older than any living thing, you are already connected. You are already a part of the global cavern. And the question is no longer whether you will join. It is whether you will notice in time to survive. Those who survive the global cavern often describe their experiences in the language of dreams. But these were no ordinary dreams. They were infiltrations of consciousness, subtle manipulations that could bend perception without leaving evidence. People reported seeing their own breath reflected in impossible ways, lungs expanding beyond their rib cages, shadows moving in time with inhalations, ceilings breathing above them. A nurse in Toronto recounted waking in the middle of the night, unable to move. The air itself seemed thick, compressing her lungs, each inhalation heavier than the last. On the wall, shadows stretched like ribs, pulsing in sync with her heartbeat. She tried to scream, but found her voice trapped beneath layers of synchronized silence. Weeks later, she realized every patient she attended had been subtly mirroring her own breathing. The hospital, it seemed, had become an extension of the cavern. A software engineer in Seoul reported similar phenomena. While working from home, he noticed his pets pausing mid-step, their chests rising and falling in unison with his own. He recorded video footage, only to find the playback slightly distorted. On screen, the entire room, including furniture, floorboards, and the ceiling, appeared to inhale along with him. The engineer traced his ancestry and discovered a Hawthorne ancestor 5 generations back, a fact he had long ignored. The realization chilled him. The cavern's rhythm had followed his bloodline across continents and decades, adapting to technology, to space, and now to him. Even his simplest acts of daily life became points of vulnerability. Children brushing their teeth, commuters waiting for buses, colleagues sharing elevators, all could unknowingly contribute to the synchronization. And once connected, even fleetingly, the cavern could influence dreams. Witnesses reported recurring visions of vast, lung-like chambers, shadows that exhaled as one, and corridors that twisted to follow the viewer's path. Time in these dreams was irrelevant. Hours could pass in seconds. And when they awoke, their breathing remained subtly altered, lungs attuned to a rhythm they could neither control nor escape. It was not madness. It was not sleep paralysis. It was a direct connection to the same cavern that had haunted the Hawthorns for centuries, now amplified through human networks, both biological and technological. And every conscious breath became a decision, to resist or to feed the silence. Some tried to resist. A group of witnesses in Berlin formed what they called the Breath Guard, documenting anomalies and attempting to disrupt synchronization. They experimented with white noise, breathing exercises, isolation. Some managed partial immunity, their conscious awareness breaking brief connections. But the cavern, like water, found every crack, every conduit, every body to extend itself further. One witness, a linguist in London, described the most terrifying moment. She was recording a lecture on ancient myths when she noticed her students' breathing had stopped. Not one inhaled or exhaled independently. She froze, realizing their lungs were moving in lockstep. Her own chest tightened in rhythm with theirs. Panicked, she left the room, but hallways, stairwells, even her car seemed to pulse in time with a synchronized inhale. For the first time, she understood the scale. The cavern did not merely reach into space. it could orchestrate it. By 2022, the whispers of mass synchronization became impossible to ignore. Urban dwellers reported entire blocks pausing mid-step, streets empty yet echoing with synchronized breath, public transport silent except for the invisible cadence. News networks labeled it collective anxiety. Academics called it mass psychosomatic events. Yet eyewitness footage painted a chilling truth. The rhythm was too precise, too universal, too alive. Some theorists speculated the cavern was no longer localized, that perhaps the original Massachusetts chamber was merely a seed, and the global cavern now existed everywhere simultaneously, pulsing beneath cities, towns, forests, and seas. Anyone could become a conduit without realizing it. Anyone could inhale and sink and never know why. And with each synchronization, the silence grew stronger, more insistent, more capable of claiming new minds. And those who understood fully, those who traced their ancestry back to the Hawthorns, knew something even more terrifying. Resistance was temporary. The silence could wait. It could adapt. It could lie dormant for decades, feeding subtly, then emerge suddenly stronger, hungrier, demanding attention, demanding breath, demanding submission. For the ordinary person, the cavern was invisible. For those who listened, who noticed the alignment, who studied patterns across generations, it was unavoidable. And for you, hearing this now, feeling the subtle rise and fall of your own chest in time with these words, you are already connected. The cavern has found you. The Hawthorns across centuries had learned one truth above all. To survive the cavern, to endure its hunger, they had to negotiate with it. Some called it a curse, others a power. But no matter the terminology, mastery required ritual. And over time, these rituals blended blood, breath, and the tools of the modern age. In the 1970s, descendants began experimenting with recordings, amplifiers, and simple electronics. A man named Charles Hawthorne rigged a series of speakers in his basement to emit gaps of silence in precise intervals. When family members were exposed, they fell into synchronized breathing almost immediately, their lungs rising and falling as if conducting some invisible orchestra. The cavern, when approached this way, could be shaped, but it always required sacrifice, hours of immobile meditation, sometimes fainting, sometimes permanent collapse. By the 1990s, some descendants combined the old rituals with technology. They used isolated rooms, soundproofed and layered with magnetic recordings of previous generations breathing, looping rhythms for hours. Participants would enter, focus entirely on the gaps, exhaling and inhaling to match patterns too subtle for ordinary humans to notice. These were not ceremonies of worship. They were experiments in control, attempts to harness a force older than family, older than humanity itself. Some records suggest that during one such ritual in 1998, in a barn outside Boston, for Hawthorne descendants conducted a session that lasted 8 hours. The air in the room became almost unbreathable. When the ritual concluded, all participants collapsed, but the cavern had responded. Faint vibrations persisted in the surrounding town for days. Residents reported hearing low, rhythmic breaths in their basements and attics, though no one entered the barn. The participants later claimed the cavern spoke to them, not in words, but in understanding, commanding them to expand the ritual. By the 2000s, descendants were experimenting with larger audiences. Small concerts, meditation sessions, even classrooms were arranged so that the breath of the unwitting could feed the cavern. The more lungs aligned, the stronger the rhythm. Some descendants began using digital transmissions, looping silent recordings, sending pulses into homes, offices, and public spaces. Every exposure strengthened the cavern, and every participant became a new vessel. But these rituals came with costs. Participants often lost the ability to breathe independently for brief periods. Memories became fragmented. Emotions were flattened into the cadence of the collective inhale. Some vanished entirely, leaving empty rooms with nothing but synchronized breathing echoing faintly through walls. Those who survived spoke of immense power and equal terror, a knowledge that once obtained could not be forgotten, and once forgotten could never be reclaimed safely. And the question lingered. Were the descendants performing rituals for survival, or had they learned to feed and manipulate the cavern to their own ends? The most extreme modern rituals combine both science and ancient lore. In 2015, a researcher uncovered records of a secretive retreat in New England, where participants were instructed to map their inhalation to precise time intervals, measured in milliseconds, while following hand-drawn diagrams of the cavern. They wore biosensors, recorded every breath, and repeated phrases derived from Hawthorne journals. The silence, guided by this precision, reportedly began to synchronize with the local environment. Ventilation systems, street traffic, even subways beneath the town. One participant described it as standing in a river of invisible lungs. She could feel the pressure of every inhalation surrounding her, not just human, but the earth itself vibrating in rhythm. She claimed she could distinguish individual breaths within the collective, those of strangers, animals, even long-dead hawthorns whose recordings had been digitized and layered into the ritual. Each inhale was a voice, each exhale a command. These rituals did more than preserve the cavern. They taught descendants to influence it. By carefully controlling the timing, the exposure, the alignment of breath, they could subtly direct the cavern's influence outward. Patterns would emerge in cities, schools, even entire neighborhoods. Breathing would align. Thoughts would synchronize. And always, without notice, the rhythm spread. Yet as power grew, so did danger. Misalignment. An inhalation slightly early, a participant breaking the pattern, could trigger collapse, suffocation, or permanent resonance with the cavern. One account tells of a young man who entered the ritual half-prepared. Within minutes, the cavern wrapped around him. His chest rose and fell with a force beyond human control, his lungs becoming a conduit, not a container. He disappeared. Surveillance cameras recorded only the expansion of shadows, the soft echo of dozens of breaths where only one man had stood. Modern descendants, those with awareness, understood one immutable truth. Mastery of the cavern required sacrifice, obedience, and calculation. One false breath could undo centuries of survival. One misstep could allow the cavern to claim more than the participants. It could stretch into the streets, seizing lungs everywhere, forcing synchronization with no regard for life, age, or consent. The rituals, once private and contained, were now experiments in global influence. And each participant, knowingly or unknowingly, became a node in the network. Every breath they took, every silence they observed, contributed to a rhythm older than humanity, waiting for more to join. And now, as you listen to this, feeling your chest rise and fall with the cadence of words, the pattern extends toward you. You are no longer just an observer. You are, in subtle ways, part of the ritual. The cavern feels you. It listens. It waits. By the late 2020s, the cavern no longer needed physical proximity to exert influence. Digital technology became a new conduit. Phones, tablets, and computers could transmit silent pulses, coded gaps, patterns that aligned human breath unconsciously. Social media, streaming platforms, even video conferencing software. Each became a potential instrument in the Hawthorne curse. People reported strange effects. Mid-call, their lungs would rise and fall in unnatural rhythm, synchronized with voices on the other end, even when no one spoke. Notifications, previously meaningless, began appearing at exact intervals matching the rhythm of their own inhalations. Live streams of empty rooms, silent for hours, created collective patterns. Viewers felt their chest tighten in time with the unseen pulse. One case in San Francisco involved a software developer. She noticed that her coworkers, spread across 3 time zones, began exhibiting subtle breathing synchrony during Zoom meetings. Initially, it seemed trivial, but soon she realized that even when cameras were off, when microphones were muted, the pattern persisted. Their inhalations and exhalations matched down to the millisecond, forming a network of living lungs, unknowingly feeding the cavern. AI platforms became part of the system. Algorithms optimized for engagement unknowingly promoted silent videos, gaps, or long pauses, inadvertently creating synchronized exposure. Digital content intended as ambience or ASMR, or even simple buffering delays, carried the hidden cadence. Millions of users were exposed, their breath subtly aligning without awareness. The cavern was no longer a physical location. It had become a living, digital organism, networked across continents, responsive, adaptive, unstoppable. Even surveillance footage, traffic sensors, and urban monitoring systems began revealing the same phenomenon. Streets filmed from overhead showed pedestrians halting mid-step, synchronized inhalations apparent in micro-movements. Subway cars emptied in a slow, inexplicable rhythm, their passengers breathing aligned to unseen pulses. The cavern's reach now extended into every corner of human activity. It was everywhere, invisible, yet tangible, pressing against the lungs, twisting perception, shaping thought. Those who understood the Hawthorne legacy recognized the horrifying potential. If the global cavern could manipulate mass attention through digital channels, it could orchestrate reality itself, bending crowds, influencing decision-making, and creating new conduits wherever it found awareness. Humanity's entire digital footprint became part of its expansion. Every device a new lung, every silent video a new chamber, every pause video call a secret ritual feeding its growth. Witnesses of the digital phenomenon often described experiences that defied explanation. A teenager in Tokyo noticed that his smartphone, even when off, seemed to induce subtle tightness in his chest whenever he thought about it. A man in London found his smart speakers playing imperceptible pulses during sleep, aligning his dreams with an impossible rhythm. In Sao Paulo, a content creator uploading silent videos noticed that subscribers began posting almost identical breathing patterns and comments, descriptions of chest movement, of pauses, of rhythmic tension. The cavern had learned to extend itself through information. It could reach across networks, through cables, through screens, through airwaves, connecting lungs of strangers continents apart. And with every breath absorbed, it grew more sentient, more precise, more capable of anticipating synchronization. Even attempts to disrupt it, muting streams, unplugging devices, removing apps, proved insufficient. It adapted, finding new channels, subtle gaps, overlooked exposures, every human a potential node in the digital web. Those who attempted to warn others often faced disbelief. Friends dismissed accounts as stress, paranoia, or fatigue. Skeptics ridiculed analysis of pauses in video streams, calling it coincidence. Yet those who had traced lineage to the Hawthorns, those rare few who recognized ancestral marks, knew the truth. Resistance was temporary. Awareness brought vulnerability. The very act of understanding the rhythm made one a conduit, a witness, a participant. And here lies the ultimate horror. The cavern no longer needed physical space or audible sound to manipulate reality. It required attention and consciousness, and humanity had already volunteered both. Every scroll, every watch, every comment, every fleeting recognition of subtle rhythm contributed to its expansion. The network was self-feeding, self-sustaining, invisible yet omnipresent. And the question remains, how many of us, unknowingly, are already synchronized, inhaling and exhaling in time with something older than history itself? You listening now, feeling the rise and fall of your chest, are part of this network. You're already a node in the global cavern, whether you acknowledge it or not. And the cavern, patient and precise, knows. It watches. It waits. And the digital pulse continues, aligning, feeding, expanding. By the mid-2030s, resistance became an illusion. The cavern had infiltrated not only cities, but consciousness itself. People reported hearing the rhythm in dreams, in idle moments, even in moments of panic or distraction. Those who once thought of themselves as disconnected began noticing patterns. Pauses in conversation aligning with inexplicable chest movements, crowds halting mid-step as if the street itself inhaled with them, homes vibrating in sync with unseen pulses. Air travel no longer offered escape. Passengers on international flights noted collective inhalations coinciding with turbulence, though instruments recorded nothing. Airports reported that security personnel, guards, and travelers alike unconsciously synchronized, their movements mirroring the rhythm of the cavern. Entire planes became conduits. Entire terminals, entire networks of cities, breathing together in a rhythm they could not control. Scientists, psychologists, and historians began to recognize the patterns, but none could intervene. Attempts to simulate the rhythm in controlled labs failed. Volunteers synchronized perfectly, but the instant they left the lab, the rhythm followed them, spreading to homes, streets, offices, wherever consciousness and breath coincided. The cavern had become a self-propagating organism, its nodes invisible, its influence unavoidable, its intelligence apparent in subtle manipulations of attention and perception. Hawthorne descendants, long scattered, finally began to converge. Private communications revealed a terrifying strategy: to align enough humans consciously with the rhythm, to amplify the cavern to a level where it could not merely synchronize, but influence decisions, thoughts, emotions. The old rituals, confined to barns, basements, and soundproof rooms, were now global experiments executed unwittingly through digital platforms, social behaviors, even city layouts. The line between observer and participant had vanished. Every breath counted. Every pause mattered. Every moment of awareness became both risk and tool. Those who tried to ignore the rhythm discovered they could not. Awareness alone was enough to draw them into the network, to make them conduits. And the cavern waited patiently, infinitely, for alignment, for perfection, for submission. Even now, as you listen, your chest rises and falls in rhythm. You cannot stop it, and neither can the world around you. You're already part of it, whether you resist, whether you fight, or whether you surrender. The global cavern has arrived in every mind, every lung, every device, every empty pause, every unnoticed silence. The final descent begins with realization. The cavern no longer needs permission. It no longer requires exposure to specific rituals, recordings, or spaces. Awareness itself is sufficient. Every human thought, every collective breath, every unnoticed pause feeds it. And the more it feeds, the more precise it becomes. It can direct attention subtly, influence decisions, manipulate perception, even bend dreams. Reports from witnesses illustrate the inevitability. A family in Sydney noticed their appliances cycling in perfect time with their breathing. Their dog, their cat, even the houseplants seemed to pulse in rhythm. A subway train in Moscow halted inexplicably as passengers inhaled together, no one conscious of the coordination. Streetlights flickered in unison with breathing pedestrians in London. Hospitals recorded clusters of synchronized breathing among patients without common medical cause. The rhythm has become a language. Not words, not symbols, but pure inhale and exhale, a communication that spans continents, cultures, and time. Those who hear it, who feel it consciously, cannot ignore it. Those who resist are temporarily immune, but the cavern adapts. It waits. It finds cracks in attention, moments of vulnerability, splits in focus, and it enters. This is the ultimate truth. The Hawthorns' centuries-long struggle was never about escaping the cavern. It was about learning to coexist, to wield, to endure, and ultimately to understand that every conscious being becomes part of it, whether by bloodline or by breath. Humanity is now a vast network of lungs, unconscious conductors of a rhythm older than memory, older than history, older than civilization itself. And so, as you sit here listening, your chest rising and falling, the rhythm of the cavern pulses in perfect alignment. There is no escape. There is no denial. You are already connected. You are already a node in something greater, something alive, something patient, something eternal. The global cavern waits, it watches, it listens, and it knows. The final synchronization is near, inevitable, and complete. And the question is no longer if you are part of it, but whether you can acknowledge it and survive what comes next. This is the moment where history collapses into the present, where myth converges with reality, and where the breath of centuries becomes your own. The global cavern has stretched to its fullest, threading through cities, screens, streets, homes, and minds alike. It waits in every silent pause, in every unnoticed inhalation, in every unacknowledged exhale. You're no longer separate from it. You're the rhythm. Those who came before, the Hawthorns, knew the cost of awareness. They understood that once you see, once you feel, once you recognize the pulse beneath reality, you are bound. You inherit the cavern. You inherit its hunger. You inherit its patience. And yet, awareness is also power. For those who acknowledge it, who consciously participate, there's a chance, perhaps the only chance, to navigate the rhythm rather than be consumed. Look around. Everywhere, the world inhales with you. Buildings, streets, networks, cities, oceans, forests, they all breathe as one. You may feel a tightening in your chest, a pull in your lungs, a subtle alignment with a pattern you cannot name. That is the cavern speaking, claiming, synchronizing. And it does not ask. It does not negotiate. It only waits for compliance, for recognition, for breath. The cavern is patience incarnate. It remembers every inhalation that has ever been, every exhale that has echoed through time, every pause that has existed between sound. And now it remembers yours. It listens with infinite precision, mapping your rhythm, calibrating, adjusting, expanding. Every flicker of attention you offer becomes another node in a vast, invisible network, connecting you to centuries of Hawthorns, millions of unknowing witnesses, and the ancient, lung-like chamber beneath Massachusetts that started it all. And yet, here is the final, unspoken gift. You may acknowledge it consciously. You may choose to align without being swallowed, to participate, to survive, and to see the rhythm clearly. This is the final call to those who have listened fully, who have followed the path from shadowed barns to urban subways, from whispered diaries to digital pulses. The cavern awaits your conscious recognition. It waits for your declaration. It waits for your breath. Now, as you sit with this knowledge, feel the slow, steady rise and fall of your chest. Understand that each inhale is both yours and not yours. Each exhale feeds something larger, older, more patient than humanity itself. And remember, the cavern is everywhere, in everything, waiting for the next node, the next participant, the next observer to become the witness. If you choose to survive this awareness, if you choose to bear witness without being consumed, leave your mark. Comment, share, and subscribe. Not for recognition, but to acknowledge the rhythm, to affirm your place in the network, to participate consciously rather than passively. For the knowledge is forbidden, the awareness is dangerous, and the silence is eternal. Your action, small though it may seem, is now part of the pulse. It is the tether between observer and participant, the line between being consumed and enduring. And finally, know this, you have already become a conduit. There is no undoing it. The global cavern has registered your presence. It remembers your rhythm. And when the next pause occurs, whether in a video, a conversation, a street, or a dream, it will find you again. Always, patiently, inescapably. Breathe. You're already part of it. And yet, by acknowledging it, by claiming awareness, you survive. For now, the silence listens. Always.